Okay, so have you ever paused to consider why we tell lies? Not just the big ones, but even those tiny white lies.
Yeah.
The ones that feel almost harmless.
Yeah, it's something we all do, isn't it? And then there's the whole issue of figuring out what's actually true in this, flood of information we get every day.
Exactly. So today we're doing a deep dive into some really fascinating material from Thomas Erikson's book, Surrounded by Liars: How to Stop Half-Truths, Deception, and, well, the title says a lot.
It really does.
It's basically a journey into this really intricate world of truth, deception, and ultimately human behavior.
And what's so interesting here, I think, is how it challenges our basic assumptions about honesty. It forces us to look closer. Our mission, really, is to pull out the most important nuggets from Erikson's work, not just defining lies, but digging into why we tell them, the surprising consequences, and crucially, how we can get better at navigating a world where truth feels, well, pretty elusive sometimes.
Right. We want to equip you, the listener, with some tools.
Yeah.
Tools for spotting deception and maybe fostering more, genuine interactions.
Exactly. Let's get into it.
Okay, so let's start with just how common lying is, and maybe how slippery the idea of honesty itself can be. Erikson talks about this workshop experience he had.
Well, yeah, the honesty workshop.
That's the one. Groups were all enthusiastic, suggesting honesty as a core value.
Yeah,
Right?
standard stuff, yeah.
But then, and this is where it gets really interesting, he asked them to define it. What does 100% honest behavior actually look like?
And that's when the enthusiasm just crumbled.
Completely. People immediately started finding reasons to, compromise the truth, especially, they said, when dealing with devious customers.
Which raises a huge question, doesn't it? If we all value honesty so much, why do we struggle so much to actually live it out consistently? The core problem, as the source points out, is that honesty isn't simple. It's not black and white. It's really complex, hard to define easily, and even harder to apply consistently in messy, real-world situations.
Absolutely. And the book suggests it's probably a reasonable assumption that pretty much everybody lies a little bit.
Even if there's no, definitive statistic for it.
Right. No irrefutable statistical evidence, as he puts it. But think about those everyday things we say, "I'm fine, thanks," when you're really not.
Or, "Oh, that dress looks great on you," when maybe you're not so sure.
Exactly. Those small, almost instinctive little untruths that just keep things simple, socially speaking.
And if we connect that to the bigger picture, the reasons for these little lies are all over the place, aren't they? Self-defense, maybe avoiding conflict.
Yeah, to impress people.
Keeping secrets, gaining social approval. I mean, the list goes on. Often they're genuinely told just to protect someone else's feelings.
Yeah.
And psychological research even hints that sometimes these white lies, they can actually benefit relationships, in certain contexts anyway.
It's true. Some lies definitely come from a place of compassion. Erikson gives the example of a dad telling his daughter her broken toy went to the toy hospital.
Oh, just to spare her the pain right then.
Exactly. But the source quickly points out the problem here. Lies are always double-edged swords, even the well-intentioned ones.
And that brings up a really important point. Even with good intentions, like that dad's compassionate lie, what happens next? What happens when those first lies mean you have to invent new lies?
Right, just to cover the first ones.
Yeah, to counteract the consequences, you can end up tangled in what the author calls a web of fraud and deceit that's just incredibly hard to escape. Most lies might not be, malicious, but as Erikson says, all lies bring consequences sooner or later. There's always a price.
So if lying is so common and honesty is so complex,
Right.
What does this mean for understanding truth itself? How does the book define truth?
Well, it defines truth as a representation of reality. Basically, a correct reflection of our knowledge, convictions, insights, and observations.
And it should remain consistent no matter how uncomfortable. That's a key part.
Absolutely. But what's really fascinating is the author's own admission of how hard he found it to pin down absolute truths.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he says almost anything is subject to question by people with sinister motives. He gives examples like Holocaust denial, or the debates about biological sex versus identity, even old beliefs like the earth being flat.
Wow. So perceived truths can be easily twisted.
Exactly. By ignorance, bad science, or sometimes just a raw desire for power. It really shows how slippery truth can feel.
And that feels especially relevant today, doesn't it? In this age of so-called fake news.
Definitely. The source gets right into that. Describes fake news as stuff that looks like factual reporting, but it's inaccurate or presented deceptively, basically just to confuse people.
And it often plays on our emotions, right? Our values, just to get those clicks.
Precisely. Sensational headlines about, I don't know, celebrity deaths that aren't true or political scandals blown way out of proportion.
It's everywhere.
And if you think about the big picture, these digital platforms mean we're facing a daily deluge of information. It's overwhelming.
Yeah.
And in that environment, less than honest individuals and institutions can easily exploit our natural curiosity. They fabricate and disseminate narratives to deceive and manipulate public opinion.
Like those troll farms you hear about.
Exactly like that. Russia's Internet Research Agency is a prime example mentioned in the book Churning Out Propaganda Disguised as News. It's quite systematic.
Okay, here's a bit that really made me stop and think. The idea that even science, data, statistics, isn't always impartial.
Science is always truthful. Oh boy, as the author puts it.
Yeah. He challenges that whole idea, saying liars use numbers too, that they often present statistics in highly deceptive ways.
So how can we trust the facts then? If people with an agenda can just distort or selectively represent statistics to fit what they want us to believe?
It's a serious question.
And the book gives some pretty grim reminders, like the tobacco industry back in the 40s and 50s with their more doctors smoke camels nonsense.
Unbelievable.
Or that infamous, widely debunked MMR vaccine study from 1998 based on just 12 children.
12. That's insane.
It really drives home the point. Numbers themselves might be neutral, but how they're presented can be anything from mildly misleading to the downright dangerous.
And building on that idea of skewed presentation, the discussion moves into political bias in the media.
Ah, yes, the news coverage angle.
It specifically looks at Swedish journalism, where studies apparently show a pretty significant overrepresentation of certain political views among journalists compared to the general population.
Which implies something important, doesn't it? Journalists are human. They might unconsciously project their own opinions and values onto everything they read.
Influencing story choices, headlines, the whole interpretation.
Exactly. And the source argues this bias in news coverage is a serious issue that can significantly impact our society and our democracy.
It feels like that leads directly to that infamous phrase, alternative facts.
Bingo. Coined by Kellyanne Conway in 2017, remember? To defend Sean Spicer's completely false claims about inauguration crowd sizes.
Yeah, I remember that.
The source just calls it a blatant attempt to legitimize a sheer fabrication in the service of a certain agenda. No mincing words there.
Okay, so we've talked about outright lies, manipulated stats, biased reporting.
Yeah.
But the book also explores something else. Silence.
Ah, the speech is silver, silence is golden idea.
Exactly. Presenting silence as maybe a viable alternative to lying sometimes, especially in our crazy 24/7 world. Maybe silence offers some mental space.
Yeah, well-being, active listening, protecting privacy, avoiding pointless fights, all good reasons. And if we try to connect this to something like the DISC model, that behavioral assessment tool.
Sure. Dominance, influence, steadiness, conscientiousness.
Right. We see some interesting patterns. Red's the extroverted, task-focused types. They might go quiet, switch off, but if bad news affects them, they'll react loudly and clearly. Blues, on the other hand, the introverted, task-focused, analytical types, they often thrive on silence. They're comfortable in their own heads, might figure out a solution, but not feel any need to share it.
Interesting.
So it really raises the question, when is silence actually a viable alternative to saying something that may not be entirely true?
The book gives some really relatable examples of using silence strategically, like your friend gets a new hairstyle.
Oh, no.
And you secretly abhor it.
Yeah.
Or your partner suggests getting a horse and you're seriously allergic.
Right. What do? Scream. Lie.
Instead, the author suggests maybe just nodding.
Yeah.
Listening. And hoping really hard they don't ask a direct question like, so what do you really think?
Been there. But here's the tricky part the book acknowledges.
What's that?
Withholding your true thoughts from people you care about, isn't that also lying in a way? It's a tough one.
That is tricky.
The source admits it's not all black and white, but generally it leans towards trying silence before resorting to white lies. The big risk with white lies is needing that log.
Right, keeping track of them all.
And potentially losing face or just completely shattering trust if you get caught out.
Yeah, that makes sense. This deep dive also gets into half-truths and deliberate omissions. Things that aren't outright lies, but
can have just as big an impact. Yeah, and the most common reason for doing that.
Let me guess. Fear.
Exactly. Fear of the consequences.
So that brings us back to the good intentions idea. Are they enough? Can good intentions justify holding back the truth?
The source shares a really powerful personal story here. The author helped a friend who was in deep financial trouble, absolute ruin, basically.
Okay.
And instead of hitting him with the brutal truth that he was on the brink of ruin, the author chose to give him hope, kept repeating everything was going to work out.
And did it work out?
Amazingly, yes, the friend recovered. But the author admits, I wasn't honest, and he says it still torments me to some extent.
Wow, that's heavy.
It really illustrates how this kind of lying undermines the trust that keeps relationships going, even when you think you're doing the right thing.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and look at some of the master deceivers the book discusses, the really infamous liars.
Right, starting with the ultimate archetype, the devil.
Presented in religious context as just sowing confusion. In Genesis, the cunning snake tempting Eve.
Establishing that reputation as the father of lies.
Mhm.
And if you look at broader stories like Faust, Mephistopheles offers Faust knowledge, pleasure, but the cost is his soul. And how does he do it? By obscuring the fine print.
Classic manipulation, playing on desire.
Exactly. But what's fascinating, the author argues, is that these ancient stories, whatever figure they use, are really about human behavior.
Right.
About our choice. Do we fall for the lie or do we resist? It reflects something in us.
Okay, let's bring it more contemporary. The book unpacks some infamous modern liars. Anna Anderson.
Yes. Claimed to be Anastasia Romanoff, the Tsar's daughter, who supposedly survived the execution. This was back in 1920.
And she got quite a following, didn't she? Even had scars she used as proof.
She did. And what's really striking is that even though she couldn't explain crucial details about Anastasia's life, people seem to want to believe. They chose to be fooled just to enjoy the excitement of being part of a fascinating life story.
Until DNA proved otherwise.
Right. DNA eventually showed she was actually Franziska Szankowska, a Polish factory worker. The author theorizes she was a highly motivated fraudster, maybe with narcissistic or even psychopathic traits.
And she understood a key principle of big lies.
Exactly. She instinctively knew if you're going to tell a lie, you might as well make it a big one. A small lie is often harder to sell.
Fascinating that when we jump into the digital age, social media deception, Caroline Calloway.
Oh, the influencer became famous for these, acclaimed stories and posts showing this perfect, idyllic life.
But it wasn't quite real.
Not according to accusations later, lying about celebrity friends, college credentials, basically fabricating her entire online persona.
So the question becomes, how do you tell the difference between genuine storytelling or calculated manipulation?
Especially when a ghostwriter comes out and says Calloway callously exploited other people's private experiences and personal tragedies to create her own content. That's pretty damning.
Yeah.
The source says her reputation as an irresponsible liar really comes from that lack of clarity on where the line between fact and fiction lies. It's a very modern form of deception tied up with performance.
And then there are figures like Lance Armstrong.
Right. The cycling icon, cancer survivor, 7 Tour de France wins, all while fiercely denying any doping.
A carefully crafted facade, as the book puts it, which eventually just fell apart.
Leading to that big televised confession with Oprah. Lost his titles, sponsors, everything.
His case really shows how far some athletes are willing to go in their pursuits of victory and fame, doesn't it?
It does. And similarly, you have Bernie Madoff. Ran that enormous Ponzi scheme.
How did he get away with it for so long?
Leveraged his appealing personality, his positions of power in stock exchange organizations, used that credibility to derail potential investigations. And what's really interesting, or maybe disturbing, is the author's observation that many people in high finance seem to have psychopathic traits very similar to the ones Bernie Madoff had.
That's a bold claim, suggesting the environment itself might play a role.
It does raise some uncomfortable questions about certain industries.
And we can't talk about infamous lies without mentioning politics. Bill Clinton.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman. Probably one of the most famous denials ever.
Made under oath about Monica Lewinsky, led straight to his impeachment.
And it was physical evidence, wasn't it? The blue dress with DNA. That forced him to finally admit to an inappropriate relationship.
So it makes you wonder, how do political figures handle that fine line between truth and lies when the evidence is undeniable?
Well, the source notes that Clinton's legacy, despite some significant achievements on the world stage, is still kind of dominated by lies and contradictions.
Because that one lie, that denial, was so huge.
Exactly. It came to epitomize the most disturbing aspects of modern politics. According to the author, it just overshadowed so much else.
Okay, so we've seen the liars, the methods. What about the consequences the toll deception takes?
Well, the most immediate and obvious consequence, the book says, is simply a loss of trust.
Makes sense. Between friends, family, partners.
Anywhere, really, and once trust has been broken, it can be difficult to regain it, sometimes impossible. And there's a deep psychological angle here, too. The psychologist Erikson, no relation to the author, by the way, his theory suggests trust is fundamental. It's the very first moral guide we develop as infants.
Determining whether we see the world as safe or dangerous.
Exactly. Safe or a place full of uncertainty and evil. So when someone lies, like John lies to Linda in the book's example, it doesn't just hurt Linda. Other people see it and think,
Is John going to lie to me too? It ripples outwards.
Precisely. It erodes the social fabric.
And beyond the impact on others, what about the liar themselves? Is there an internal cost?
Oh, absolutely. Physically and psychologically. The source mentions that dishonesty makes the brain enter a state of heightened alert.
Like a stress response.
Yeah. Increased heart rate, breathing changes, sweating. The limbic system, our emotional center, lights up. Your body knows you're doing something wrong, basically.
But does that wear off? Can people get used to lying?
Disturbingly, yes. Studies show a kind of concerning tolerance when it comes to lying, developing over time. Brain scans reveal reduced activity in their limbic system during prolonged dishonest behavior.
So the more you lie, the easier it gets. Less guilt, less stress.
Emotionally and mentally, yes. It becomes easier, to the point where liars can even start to believe it themselves. They blur their own sense of reality.
That's scary. And professionally, socially, being known as a liar must be damaging.
Hugely. It can damage your reputation permanently. It makes it hard to build new relationships, get ahead in your career.
The book gives an example, right, about the golfer?
Yeah, the businessman whose wife saw his golf partner cheating. She refuses to let her husband do business with the guy.
Her logic being, if he cheats in a game.
He'll cheat in business. She draws a direct line. Trust is gone.
And does this impact different personalities differently? Going into the DISC model.
Yes, the author suggests it does. For Reds, needing authority and influence, losing trust is particularly damaging to their whole way of operating.
Okay.
Yellows, the influential, outgoing types, they might be prone to embellish stories anyway, often entertaining. But their own self-deception can make it tough for others to know what really happened. Greens, the steady, supportive types, are sensitive to criticism, so being exposed as a liar can hit them really hard, like post-traumatic stress issues, the author suggests. And blues, the conscientious, detail-oriented specialists, if they're caught fudging data or just being plain wrong about facts, it devastates them. It ruins their whole stature as specialists.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, shifting to the digital world again. This is where things get really alarming with deep fakes.
Oh, yeah. Hyper-realistic AI videos or audio. The potential for chaos is, well, catastrophic, as the book says.
Like a fake video of a leader declaring war.
Exactly. Imagine the panic. And it's especially dangerous on social media because of algorithms creating these filter bubbles and echo chambers.
Where you only see things that confirm what you already believe.
Right, which reinforces falsehoods. The Pizzagate conspiracy is mentioned as an example, a totally baseless rumor that had real-world violence attached to it because it spread so fast in those bubbles.
And they're the bots.
The software pretending to be human online, they contribute to what the source calls false amplification.
Making messages seem way more popular than they actually are.
Precisely. Artificially boosting things to sway public opinion, making outlandish views seem perfectly normal just through sheer volume.
So that influencer with 1 million followers.
A huge chunk of them could just be bots, lending this false air of credibility. It's incredibly deceptive.
So with all this deception flying around, how do we actually spot liars? Who's good at it?
Well, the source mentions professionals, obviously interrogators, deception researchers. But it also asks a good question. Is knowing how to spot lies the same as actually being able to do it?
Good point. It's one thing to know the theory.
Exactly. So how can we, just regular people, get better at it? The book offers some practical tips, like ask unexpected questions.
Exactly.
Like asking someone claiming to be 21 for their birth year instead of their age. It forces quicker thinking, harder to lie smoothly.
Smart. What else?
Ask for clarification, push for details, and crucially, don't help them get better at lying. by filling in gaps for them.
Okay. And nonverbal cues, body language.
Yeah, it touches on those. Fleeting micro-expressions, a defensive physical posture like crossed arms, constantly clearing their throat or swallowing, pursed lips, sudden changes in vocal pitch.
But no single tell.
No, definitely not. The key is looking for combinations of clues and, most importantly, deviations from the individual's normal behavior. What's unusual for them?
Right. Now here's a paradox. Psychologists. You'd think they'd be expert lie detectors working with people all day.
You would think, but the source reveals something surprising. Almost every single therapy client admits at some point to lying or being less than truthful with their therapist.
Really? About what?
Often sensitive stuff, their level of distress, how severe their problems are, even suicidal thoughts.
Wow. And do the therapists catch it?
Here's the kicker. Researchers found 73% of clients' lies were never discovered during therapy.
73%? That's huge. Why would patients lie when they're there for help?
Well, reasons vary. Fear of consequences, maybe being hospitalized, forced into rehab, shame is a big one, or just feeling their therapist simply won't understand them. It's complex. Interestingly, the author throws out a personal theory, though he admits there's no data.
Go on.
He speculates that blue personalities, remember, the introverted, analytical, question-asking types, might have a natural aptitude for finding and smoking out liars. Just a hunch on his part.
Interesting thought. Okay, so let's say you suspect someone is lying and you feel you need to confront them. How do you even approach that? It sounds incredibly awkward.
It's never simple. The book says the first absolutely crucial step is trying to understanding their motive. Why did they lie?
Was it self-preservation? Social pressure? Maybe even that altruistic deception we talked about earlier, the good intentions thing.
Exactly. Understanding the why is key before you even think about confronting. And then the advice is to create a safe environment for that conversation.
What does that look like?
Choosing neutral territory, not their office or your kitchen, practicing active listening, really hearing them out, maintaining open body language, no crossed arms, lean in a bit.
And avoiding blame.
Definitely. Phrase it like, I felt hurt when I discovered, rather than, you lied to me. Also, assuring absolute confidentiality if possible, and trying hard to cultivate empathy.
So the goal isn't just getting the objective truth out.
Not solely. It's also about understanding the subjective realities within which the deception occurred, getting the bigger picture, the context behind the lie.
Okay, this next part is fascinating. To help us recognize and detect other people's lies, the author actually walks through how to construct a believable lie.
Right, kind of reverse engineering it so you can spot the techniques. An 8-step process.
What's the core idea behind a good lie, according to this?
A truly advanced liar knows a good lie should be as close to the truth as possible. Keep it simple, keep it plausible.
It makes it easier to remember and harder to disprove.
Exactly. Key steps include having a clear motive, focusing on just enough detail, but not too much, especially if that's out of character for you. Being consistent in your behavior.
Like Goebbels' idea. Repeat a lie often enough.
Precisely. Anticipate the counter questions they might ask. Really master your body language. Maybe subtly reinforce the lie over time. And this is crucial plant and exit strategy. How do you get out of the lie if you need to?
Wow, that's quite the playbook. The book gives an example, right, Sam?
Yeah, Sam, the IT guy, accidentally deletes a whole month of crucial financial data. Big mistake.
Oops.
He uses these 8 steps meticulously to build a convincing story about a system error being responsible.
You're gonna get away with it.
He did. It's a stark illustration of how effective these techniques can be when applied strategically.
And the book connects this to real-world situations.
Oh, yeah, like job recruitment. The author, drawing on his own experience as a recruiter, says very few candidates are 100% truthful in interviews.
People embellish their experience, maybe leave out unflattering details.
All the time. So the big challenge for recruiters is trying to penetrate all the embellished experiences and platitudes to get to the real person.
How do they do that?
Often by looking for those subtle inconsistencies in body language or speech patterns that might emerge over the course of an interview or multiple interviews. It's about spotting the cracks in the performance.
So, bringing this all together, what does this deep dive mean for you, the listener? What are the big takeaways?
I think the main thing is that our relationship with truth is just incredibly complex. It's way beyond a simple right or wrong.
Yeah, from those little white lies we tell maybe to protect someone's feelings.
Right up to these intricate deceptions by con artists or politicians we just discussed. Every single untruth, whether you say it out loud or just withhold it, it carries consequences. Nothing happens in a vacuum. And this leads to a really interesting, maybe slightly uncomfortable question for you to think about. The source actually includes a self-assessment quiz.
Asking you to reflect on your own habits. Truth, silence, outright lies.
Exactly. And it's kind of paradoxical, isn't it? A genuinely honest person might tick the box saying, yeah, I lie occasionally.
Whereas a really prolific liar might present themselves as completely truthful on that same test.
Precisely. It highlights the difficulty in self-reporting honesty.
So ultimately, what's the path forward? How do we navigate this?
Well, the author suggests, pretty powerfully, I think, that the path to a less complicated life often starts by just embracing honesty, even when it's really hard, even when it feels scary.
He shares his own experience with that.
Yeah, saying that speaking the truth, even when terrifying, often leads to this profound sense of relief. Freedom, almost.
Freedom from having to keep track of the lies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that leaves us with a final kind of provocative thought to chew on. What's the absolute worst that could happen if you just laid the truth bare?
Usually less terrible than we imagine.
More often than not, yeah. You might find it can't actually do that much harm in the long run. And every lie you don't tell means one less lie you need to tell later. It spares you that fear of being exposed.
Helps you feel more secure.
More secure in yourself, definitely.
Well, we really hope this deep dive into Surrounded by Liars has given you some valuable insights, maybe some practical tools for navigating this really intricate world of truth and deception.
Stay vigilant out there. Stay curious.
And as always, keep learning.